Oh, hello there. Yes, well, trundling our way through the week, I suppose. Yesterday was Holocaust Memorial Day. Yes, that's where a gang of very, very, very elderly people gather to, just be quite pompous at us. But, elsewhere, of course, survivors of the horror and misery that the Second World War was were perhaps trying, some of them, to give us a different message. The British media does love to come out and be as pompous as possible, but the takeaway, as ever, is always that certain types of discrimination are very, very, very bad indeed. But most of the discrimination that kind of dehumanises people and allows us to completely forget about them is quite okay. Lots of that was on display, so I give you in perhaps the GB News Corner Andrew Pearce and Miriam Cates, who were mostly upset about the notion that there might be a language style guide in the police force. What a load of woke nonsense, said gay man Andrew Pearce, backed up by, what I can only describe as a woman, with Miriam here. Yes, they were having a good laugh about that. It's actually a story that's a few days old, but it's worthwhile revisiting it. But the problem I have with all of this stuff, you see, with my, what do you call it? knowledge of journalism, of course, is that all journalists will utilise style guides. The one that's most commonly in use, yes, I know, boo hiss, is actually the BBC one that suggests various things you can call gay men or women. Now, if I was to go on and have an argument with one of these people and call them a sodomite, you could see that there might well have a kind of, it might well be regarded as a not politically correct, and I'm sure Andrew would get quite upset about that, and no doubt the bint next to him would do the same thing. You see what I'm doing here? And yet it's okay to laugh at people that try to moderate their language, because after all, language is important, isn't it? Yes, but not to those two, unless of course it is them that's the victims, in which case it's very, very bad indeed. We come on inevitably to Julia Hartley-Brewer, who reacted to my second favourite story of the day, which was, this one. Julia Hartley-Brewer reacts furiously, I told you, after a new survey found that more than half of Gen Z thinks Britain would be better off with a dictator. How sodding terrifying is that? I was wondering if that was part of their style guide there at GB News. Might well be. I'm not quite sure about sodding people. Perhaps she means Andrew. But, of course, here Julia is allowed to get very, very, very cross at the idea that democracy might be something that the people of Britain don't really care about very much. But on a generic level, I seem to recall when I was growing up, and would have been at the same age that a lot of Gen Z are now, there are an awful lot of people in the UK that would suggest that why can't we just have the best people in charge? It almost always invariably was a survey that would suggest that Richard Branson should be running things, and indeed, why isn't he? But the very next tweet that Julia or the Talk TV team put out was this one, which you might want to think about, okay, in relation to the horrors of a totalitarian, non-democratic system, whereby she was chatting to a senior Labour figure, and Julia Hartley-Brewer debates Labour's Law Falconer over returning small boats to France. Julia, if the French don't like it, they can engage with our warships. And Falconer replied, that is about as unthought out a policy as I've heard in a long time. Yes, indeed, isn't it? But of course, that's okay to bring up Holocaust Memorial Day about the idea that we should just patrol the channel, because of course that is what lots of people do want to happen, because after all, back in the 1930s it was suggested that as well. There were all of these German Jews that wanted to come here, and by God, we weren't going to have any of that, were we? Imagine allowing all those aliens into the country with their nasty ways and their pernicious sexual appetites. Yes. Still, we mustn't think about these kind of things on Holocaust Memorial Day. And perhaps the apogee was this particular story, which again was gaining a lot of traction. British voters support raft of Donald Trump's policies in blind polling tests. But how many do you agree with? This is from the Daily Mail, so obviously it's pretty much all of them. But the problem with this was the polling company involved had basically given people a whole bunch of what we might call apple pie style statements. An apple pie statement is how much do you think people should love their mothers? And of course the answer is over 100%. So we were given all of these kind of theoretical stances that Trump has in generic terms. So, for example, would we want to see the price of eggs coming down? To which the answer is, of course, yes, of course we would. The problem being, of course, that Donald Trump hasn't lowered the price of eggs and probably won't because of bird flu problems in the state's supply chain. But I was struck by this particular one that nobody decided to mention, which is education promotes self-hatred. Oh, boo hiss. We have an education system that teaches our children to be ashamed of themselves and in many cases to hate our history. And you can see that basically people didn't agree with that. Oh dear, I wonder if the media will pick up on that particular anomaly. And the answer is, of course, no, because we all know that that's completely wrong. Yes, you, the democratic British public, are wrong, unless it suits them, of course, because that is the nature, of course, of democracy. We kind of pick and choose. But for me, the absolute epitome of the utter hypocrisy came from Mayor Tusi, who has gained an awful lot of attraction with his gorgeously right-wing, oh no, sorry, I'm not allowed to say that, gorgeously very sensible centrist thing, unless of course you are Leo Kearse, I notice you did manage to say about right-wing people. I don't know if people will throw bricks at him for that, but anyway, the problem in Gaza is not just Hamas, it is hateful anti-Semitism amongst the whole society. Yeah, remember, bear in mind this is Holocaust Memorial Day, so open source intel, he'd reposted that, yeah, me neither, said free hostage Liri Elbag's father shared in an interview. Liri told me, Dad, don't be mistaken, there are 2 million terrorists there. I sat with 8 and 4-year-old children who were cursing Jews. Yeah, and we can see exactly the nastiness that these people are, yeah? You know, all those nasty people that want to cross the channel, get past the Royal Navy and come here. Yeah, imagine that, right, okay? Being cross with Israel just because they're bombing you and starving you. I mean, I can't get my head around that as a human being, and obviously Mayor, and indeed by extension most of the British media, can't do it either. Yes, Holocaust Memorial Day, when we should remember that basically some people are just intrinsically bad and should, of course, be wiped out. You can't, of course, make this stuff up, can you? And unfortunately I don't. Yes, those who don't learn from history I think should be put up against a wall and shot, because you know they're quite bad, aren't they? Particularly the Bints and the Sodomites, yes. Oh, and others. You can just insert your own particular form of nasty hatred. You know, and justify it any way you want. But remember that these people might well turn against you, which thankfully will prove exactly how dangerous they are. It is something that I often say, but Joseph Goebbels, upon hearing that there was a rising in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943, said, "This is exactly what happens when you allow Jews to have guns." And we can all see how right he was. Possibly not. Do have a glorious day. Stay warm, stay dry, stay open-minded, and watch out for that language, because like it or not, it does lead us into situations where we decide that certain people aren't really worthwhile, and that has to be a bit iffy, really. Possibly. Well, with some people. Maybe not a lot of our media. See the problem?